This week on Q&A, our guest is David Bossy. He's the head of Citizens United and the producer of Hillary the Movie, which was the subject of the recent Supreme Court decision on campaign financing.
David Bossy, on January the 22nd, Bob Edgar, president of the Common Cause Group, wrote the following: Thursday was a bad day for democracy. The Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission paves the way for unlimited corporate and union spending in elections and the drowning out of the average citizen's voice in our public policy debates. What's your reaction?
Well, look, the liberals have been hyperventilating since this case was really accepted to the Supreme Court. They have been actively participating in the process, filing amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs at the Supreme Court, not once but twice. They have submitted polling data. They've been out in the field doing polling to the American people. Look, they're very interested in their viewpoint, and their viewpoint is, in my opinion, that they want less speech. They want fewer people to be able to participate in the process. I fight for the First Amendment. I'm fighting for your average person, including Common Cause, including the ACLU, including Planned Parenthood, to be able to say their piece without Big Brother, without the government being able to participate in telling them what they can and cannot say and when they can and cannot say it.
You show an excerpt of what started all this, about a minute of the movie, Hillary the Movie.
After announcing her bid for the presidency, fellow Democrats, including former Clinton confidant and Hollywood mogul David Geffen, publicly questioned Hillary's integrity and truthfulness. Such breaks within the Clinton inner circle beg the question: what is the truth about Hillary Rodham Clinton?
It's a recklessness that's born of arrogance that goes back to her 1960s roots in their narcissism. They believe they are a rule unto themselves. I mean, every time Hillary's been caught in a scandal, she really did it. No one made it up.
She's deceitful. She'll make up any story, lie about anything, as long as it serves her purpose of the moment. And the American people are going to catch on to it.
So who is the real Hillary Clinton? Is she a brilliant trailblazer poised to make history as the first female president? Or is she ruthless, cunning, dishonest, willing to do anything for power?
I've got the DVD in my hand, Hillary the Movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty tough stuff, and there's a lot more in it. What was the point of all this?
Well, it's a 90-minute documentary. We felt that having Hillary Clinton not be in the public eye for many years, while she and Bill Clinton, after they left the White House, until the time where she ran for the U.S. Senate, of course, a very short period, but she was not out there every day as a national figure. And there was an entire generation of young people, young voters, who didn't know who Hillary Clinton was. So I felt that with my background, and with an organization, Citizens United, that was producing as part of our overall efforts documentary films, I felt that let's make a film on Hillary Clinton so that we can educate the American people just about who she is. And so we started down that path. We made a film, and we knew kind of what the outcome would be in the sense of us ending up at court. I didn't know what the outcome would be, of course, in the courts, but we knew we were going to run into trouble because we had previously tried to do it in 2004 with our first film, Celsius 4111. So it was not news to us, and the Federal Election Commission loves to flex its muscles when it comes to people participating in the political process. So I always have to hire lawyers first before I can figure out what I can say and where I can say it, and so does everybody in America, to be candid. So that's why we did this.
When did you first hire the lawyer, Ted Olson, to do this for you?
Golly, well, I hired Ted once we were accepted to the Supreme Court. So I had known Ted for almost 15 years prior to this. He's a friend of mine. His wife Barbara The late Barbara Olson was a dear friend of mine, somebody who was murdered on September 11th, was on the plane that left Dulles International Airport and was flown into the Pentagon on that fateful day. And I remember getting the phone call from Barbara Comstock, we were kind of the three musketeers on Capitol Hill all throughout the 90s. And to hear the tragedy that was going on that day we were shaken to our core, myself and my wife, and to hear then that Barbara was on the plane was incredible. So Barbara was a Clinton expert's expert. Barbara Olson knew more about the Clintons than anybody. Had written a couple of books, best-selling books about the Clintons. And so when this film came out, I called Ted when I was finishing the film in 2007 and asked his permission to dedicate the film to Barbara. So he knew about the film just from that vantage point of me dedicating it to his late wife. But I've known Ted a long time. He's one of the greatest lawyers to set foot in the Supreme Court. He, of course, his background is second to none. He's a former Solicitor General. He argued as Solicitor General against us in the first McCain-Feingold case, the McConnell case in 2002, which I was a party to, that Mitch McConnell led. And before that, he argued, of course, Bush versus Gore in 2000.
Let me just make a connection. One of the things you try to do with all the stuff you've been involved in is to connect the dots. On the back of this, Hillary the movie, it says down here, executive producers David Bossy, Lawrence Kadish, and Lincoln Club of Orange County. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's still valid, but you go to Lincoln Club of Orange County and you find someone involved who was the president of the Lincoln Club of Orange County, who is the head of the Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher law firm. Now,
out there.
Out there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any connection because Ted Olson worked for that firm?
No, but that's it's a great coincidence. But no, I mean, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher is obviously one of the nation's premier and largest law firms. So to think that there would be a successful lawyer at Gibson, Dunn in Los Angeles or in their Orange County office that is involved with the Lincoln Club, which is a conservative/Republican club out there where Ronald Reagan got his start, I might add. I don't know who that is, but that's okay. That's a great thing.
I wanted to ask you the basic question. The Lincoln Club of Orange County, one of the executive producers, does that mean they paid for it?
They helped, yes. Their membership, actually they passed the hat and they got a lot of their members to help support the film.
How much did they throw in the pot?
I think approximately $100,000.
And then Lawrence...
And the film had a budget of about $1.2 million, $1.3 million for
and
production.
And Lawrence Kadish, who was the other one, is connected to the Claremont Institute, but he's a business guy.
He is. He's a real estate businessman.
Supports a lot of conservative causes?
Yes, he does. He's a terrific friend of mine. Mr. Kadish is just a wonderful man. He earned his education in the streets of New York. He was a Golden Gloves boxer when he was a teenager. Is one of these old school businessmen that you only kind of read about these days. There are very few of them left. He of course is trying to run his business. Tremendous man. He and his wife Susan have become very good friends of my wife and I over the years, and we've had a chance to travel together. And
question though, did you go to him for the money, or did he come to you to ask you to do the movie?
Oh no, I went to him. I mean, look, we're an ongoing concern. We make movies. I mean, so I'm out there every day trying to raise money to make the next one. We're a nonprofit. We don't have, MGM or Fox Searchlight or Lionsgate behind us. All corporations, I might add, that love to make movies. We just have our donors. And so when I think of an idea, whether it's a book or a movie, television commercial, I talk to my biggest and best supporters. We obviously By the way, Citizens United has over 500,000 donors and supporters across the country. So we're one of the bigger conservative groups in the country. And when I took the group over, now 9 years ago, we had well less than 100,000 members, but we also had about a $3.5 million budget. Today we're over 500,000 members, and we're close to a $25 million budget. So
how many people work there?
Depending on the amount of movies in production, anywhere from 20, 25, 30. So we're in about a 25-person.
How much of your activities are movies?
Quite a bit.
I mean, is that everything you do?
No. We have policy papers, investigative reports. We publish newsletters, online operations. We do the old school petition drives and letter writing campaigns, all the way, which is kind of the old school politics, all the way through the current internet operation and new media. So we do short videos on YouTube. We do 30-second and 60-second commercials. We make films and we write books.
Here's a little bit of the movie so we can get a flavor of what you were doing.
Sure.
Hillary's first effort to socialize health care came in 1993 during her husband's first term. Widely perceived as a disaster, many say it provoked the Republican Revolution.
I mean, certainly you have to ask whether or not she's learned a lot from that experience. It was a failure. She knows it was a failure. It was a very embarrassing failure for her.
Where have you seen the government make anything more efficient and less costly and more effective by its presence? Where have you seen that?
As I've said on many occasions, I still have the scars to show from what we tried to do back in the first 2 years of Bill's administration.
The effort to kill Hillary Care was really good common American sense. Americans know a bad fish when they smelled one.
Everything Hillary wants for America is what Canada does for all of its people, any one of whom that has $5 extra in their pocket comes across the border to the United States for health care services.
I think it's worth remembering, after her health care fiasco, the Clinton team put us aside. They gave her ceremonial duties thereafter. She was more like a Pat Nixon than she was like an Eleanor Roosevelt from mid-94 onward, because Bill Clinton's professionals recognized she'd made a hash of the one big policy she'd been given.
She was essentially out of the White House in 95, 96. And I know because I was there most of that time. She was visiting China. She went to 70 foreign countries. She wrote a best-selling book, did book signings. Then when the Lewinsky scandal broke, she came back to Washington, and in 98 and 99 led the effort to keep her husband in office, and in 99 and 2000 spent her time running for the Senate in New York.
Where was this scene ever? Was it on any television network?
No, we were precluded from it. It was against the FEC rules. So if I had done that,
Federal Election Commission.
Yeah, the Federal Election Commission. And I wanted to do that. Don't get me wrong. I wanted it to be seen. I wanted it to be seen far and wide. But I was told by my lawyers that it's not just McCain-Feingold. People don't understand. McCain-Feingold criminalized political speech. And when I say that, I mean it, in that my lawyers told me that it's not a civil penalty any longer. It's not the FEC comes in and slaps you with a fine of $5,000 or $50,000. It's criminal, where I would be indicted and put in prison for 5 years per count, meaning every time they found a violation, I could be put in prison. And I was, to be candid, I'm a political guy. I've been around the Hill for a long time. I'm not a pushover, but I was kind of surprised by my lawyer's admonition that you really don't want to do that. And I said, wow, we're an ongoing concern of making films. Where are we going to say enough's enough? Where are we going to say we draw the line here? And I said, well, let's do it on this film, because we know with our success in making of these films and being able to make them and distribute them widely, we want to not have our hands tied. So we decided to not let the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, come for us. We actually sued them.
So go back to the beginning of all this. When was the film conceived?
A film was conceived in 2004, is when I decided to make our first film. And then we made
First
our
film about Hillary
Celsius.
Clinton.
No, Celsius
No, I mean, when
4111.
was this film?
2005, 2006.
And how did it start? I mean, and did it start about the whole idea of getting rid of the McCain-Feingold restrictions on corporate spending
Well, what
and
it
union
did,
spending?
yeah. Well, first of all, to go back to 2004, we lived through the Federal Election Commission's rulings and results of what we were trying to do as far as making movies. So it had nothing to do with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was a vehicle, if you will. The movie was a vehicle. And so we knew we were going to run into roadblocks and obstacles because of 2004, what happened there. I mean, Michael Moore made his movie, and we saw its impact. We decided to try and answer that, and so we were told by the Federal Election Commission, you can't.
I read in, I think it was the filing, or maybe it was the decision of the district court, that you all started out with the intent of putting it in 7 theaters and selling it for about $23.95 or something like that as a DVD.
Hillary the movie?
Hillary the movie. Did you ever get into a theater?
Oh, we did show it in theaters. But because, see, the funny part is you can make the movie, you just can't let anyone know it exists because I was forbidden to advertise. That was my point. I couldn't put a 30-second commercial on, Brian. I could make a movie about Hillary Clinton. You could have the primary process in full gear, people engaged in the political process, looking for information on those candidates. And I couldn't put a TV commercial on that said, or a radio commercial on, that said, coming to a theater near you, Hillary the movie, or go buy the DVD out this Friday, or video on demand, purchase it in your own home. I was precluded because of McCain-Feingold, because of the criminalization of that act. I was not able to do it, and that's why I decided to sue them.
So you go back to the beginning of all this. Did you pick up the phone and call the Lincoln Club of Orange County or Larry Kadish, or give us that scenario?
Well, in 2004, if you'd like me to go back, what happened was Michael Moore came out with Fahrenheit 9/11, an incredibly powerful, successful documentary, the #1 box office documentary of all time. He, in my opinion, didn't let the facts get in the way of a good story from his standpoint, but needless to say, as a political guy, as somebody who works in this town and realizes the importance of pushing back, of hey, we need to have an answer for this. I didn't pick up the phone and call Donor. I picked up the phone and called my other political friends around town and said, hey, we can't let this stand. We have to have a response. And everybody said, Dave, nobody knows how to make movies in this town. And
nobody conservative knows how to make movies?
I'm sorry, yes, of course. There's plenty of liberals, Hollywood's full of them, that knows how to make movies, Michael Moore, and there's plenty of liberal documentarians, but from a conservative standpoint, there wasn't anyone. So I decided, after being kind of told that and knew that, I just didn't figure I would be told no summarily, that this can't happen. I decided to do it on my own. And so Citizens United produced. We went out to Hollywood. I called Ron Silver, the late Ron Silver now, my friend at the time, literally one of the 2 conservatives in Hollywood that I knew. I mean, literally there were 2 that I could count. Today, there's a lot. There's many that have come out of the woodwork to support conservative causes, but I called Ron.
By the way, there's a picture on your website from a premiere with you and Robert Duvall,
yeah.
I believe.
He came to the Hillary premiere. Out in Los Angeles. He is.
Has he been active? Did he help you raise money with this?
No, not at all. To be candid, he literally just showed up to the Los Angeles premiere of Hillary the movie, unbeknownst to me. It was very exciting to have him there.
So you went out to Hollywood and talked to Ron Silver and
Lionel Chetwynd. Lionel is an incredibly well-known writer and director. And so I called the 2 of them and I said, well, how do we make a movie and have it out by Election Day? Because obviously this was now the mid-June, end of June, that Michael Moore's film was really having the impact that I really decided. So really July 1st, we started producing a film. I went to the Federal Election Commission. I filed a complaint against Michael Moore. And so, because I said, hey, wait a minute, this guy is running TV commercials which in my opinion were a lot better than John Kerry's commercials as far as the political angle of the film, of the ads trying to make George Bush look bad. And I said, wow, this guy's really creative and he's come up with some really great TV spots, but how can he show them 30 days before the Republican convention and 60 days before the general election? It doesn't have to follow the same rules.
Those are the rules. You couldn't do that.
That's right. Those are the blackout periods. 30 days before a primary, 30 days before the national conventions, and 60 days before the general election,
and that
which are now gone.
came out of McCain-Feingold law.
Those were McCain-Feingold laws. And it's very complicated. I mean, that's part of the problem here is you really need to hire a battery of lawyers and accountants before you even start, because you don't want to be in trouble on your first step.
Did you know at the time you'd end up in the Supreme Court with the Hillary the movie?
I certainly was hoping.
At that time?
Sure.
Did you talk that over with your colleagues, your friends?
You know, I probably went around town talking to different lawyers, including Ted Olson, I might add, in 2004. And I said, hey, I think I really have an interesting idea here. You know, you never know what happens. I mean, it's all hypothetical at that point in time. But the theory of the case really developed early on for me. And I walked into my general counsel's office and I told him what I thought, and he kind of was like, yeah, well, that's a really good idea. Because, and let me just say this, very important point. The Federal Election Commission had an opportunity to make this go away. The Federal Election Commission, I went to them in 2004, hat in hand, and I said, please, I'm just some guy, could I please have the media exemption? I make documentary films. And they said no.
Why not?
Because we were not a media entity from their standpoint. We were not the mainstream media. Well, of course you were. Brian, when you started this C-SPAN 30 plus years ago now, you were one guy with an idea and some cameras. They could have told you no with the current law. I mean, where is it that the Founding Fathers, what I said to myself and to my lawyers was, where was it that the Founding Fathers, when they wrote the First Amendment, protecting free speech, and within that political speech is the most important speech, did they think that the New York Times Corporation, the Washington Post Company, General Electric would be 225 years later those that had the media exemption, the people who would be protected and their First Amendment rights would be protected? I don't think so, because your average person had a printing press and they printed flyers and they stood on soapboxes. That's who was protected, and that's who they thought should be protected. So we went to the Federal Election Commission and asked for the media exemption, and they said no.
I want to come back to all this, but I want to go to you for a minute. I found this article from 1998 from, this comes from WorldNet Daily, which is a conservative operation. I don't know if you've seen this. David Bresnahan wrote this. Have you seen this? Or do you remember?
I mean, it's 12 years ago, 13 years ago. So I probably at the time I probably did.
The question is, who is David Bossy? And starts off David Bossy.
Well, they didn't like me very much, so I don't know what that.
Why
says.
didn't they?
I have no idea.
And they're conservative.
Sure, but I mean, you know, I'm my own man. I've always been my own man in this town, and I don't necessarily wear. I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative leader. I try to be the best conservative leader that I can be, but not every conservative, and I think there's plenty of people that would attest to this on both sides of the aisle. You never please all the people all the time.
The reason I'm using this is a way to get to some of the background that you've been involved in. It says David Bossy, the aide, let go in the Webster-Hubbell transcript flap, was either extremely incompetent or was intentionally trying to sabotage investigations in the House fundraising inquiry, according to sources to the committee who did not wish to be identified. Is any of that, what part of, either one of those true? Either you're incompetent.
I was clear. Or I clearly have an opinion on not being incompetent.
Or were you intentionally trying to sabotage the investigation of the House fundraising?
Well, what that is that comes from an angle of, you know, was I, and to be candid, I do remember that now, and that happened on occasion that what now is referred to as the blogosphere, where there's these folks out there who, without any real responsibility, just make accusations, and that happens for liberals and conservatives. But look, I was a hardworking investigator back then. I had a reputation of being fairly brash, of being a young gunslinger, and I ended up paying the price for that. But I was okay with it.
Price from
being fired on national television. I mean, that's when the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, announces that you've been let go. And by the way, at the time that he did that, I hadn't been let go in the sense that the cart was a little bit before the horse in the timing of it. I found out about it live on CNN at the time. So it was a little bit of a shocker to me. But look, I was the Whitewater investigator.
For Dan?
No, on the Senate side. For when Al D'Amato was chairman of the Whitewater investigation, I was one of the main investigators there. Locke Faircloth, who was on the committee, former senator from North Carolina, one of the great old characters from the U.S. Senate, along with Al D'Amato, if you talk about two characters, working with them, and Orrin Hatch and Richard Shelby on that committee. It was a phenomenal time in my life.
But you also were with
and then for a couple of years I worked there in the Senate, and I actually was recognized by some folks over in the House side for being kind of pushing things along on the Clinton administration and those investigations, the Whitewater investigation at that time. And when the campaign finance, the illegal foreign money investigation, was born from the Whitewater investigation. And so Mike Chertoff, who ended up being Secretary of Homeland Security, was on the committee with me, and I was with him. He was the boss. I was a thorn in his side most days. But Mike was the one who asked the question of all people, Webster Hubbell, about where he was getting his payoffs from. If you remember back in the 90s, Webster Hubbell received millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in no-work contracts from friends of Bill.
And he had worked for, what was he, number 3?
He was the number 3 at the Justice Department, and then he had to resign, and he ended up going to prison. And
Is he out yet?
Oh yeah, no. He spent a couple of years in a minimum or very low security. He wasn't a hazard to anyone, but he's and he paid his price clearly. But it was basically that. One investigation was born from another. Mike Chertoff asked the question about the Riadis and foreign money during the Senate hearing, and that's how we even got into the Lippo group and then all the Chinese money that came into the Clinton administration and the Clinton campaigns.
And then you were subsequently fired when you worked for Dan.
Well, then I worked, and then I left the Senate when the committee wrapped up its work, and I went to work in the House of Representatives, and then I was the chief investigator there, so I was in charge of the committee, and that's where Barbara Olson and Barbara Comstock and I worked together.
Where's Barbara Comstock today?
Barbara Comstock is a delegate in Virginia. She was just elected to the House of Delegates in Northern Virginia, and is trying to deal with snow removal issues today in Fairfax, right?
All right, but I want to get to David Bossy. You were born where?
East Boston, Massachusetts.
What year?
1965. Thank you for...
Makes you 45?
I like to say I just turned 44 until my next birthday. That's my little thing. But I'm November 65, so I'm 44.
Your first political job?
A volunteer or paid?
Anyway,
first thing I worked in the Reagan-Bush re-election effort as a volunteer in 1984 in Silver Spring, Maryland, near my home, where my parents moved us from. I was born and raised in the Northeast almost my entire life, and then I lived through the Carter administration and lived through the first 4 years of the Reagan administration. So when it was time for me to go vote and to get in or to pay attention enough to vote, and my parents were not political at all. My family was not political at all. I was the first registered Republican in my house, in my family that I know of. So it was something new to me, and actually I didn't know to be a Republican. I'll be candid. When I went to register to vote in 1984, I went out to the voter registrar's office, and I filled out the form, and I handed it back to her, and as I was turning to walk away, she said, "Oh, excuse me, you didn't fill out in Maryland, you're required to put a Republican, Democrat, or Independent in the box." And I said, well, she said, well, you got to put one in there. I said, well, geez, I'm 7, I have no idea. I just want to be what Ronald Reagan is to her. And she said, well, I can't tell you what Ronald Reagan is, but here's the Washington Post. Go figure it out. And literally she made me sit down in the voter registrar's office there, and I read the Washington Post and figured out he was a Republican and put an R in the box.
In this David Bresnahan piece back in '99, it says David Bossy has maneuvered his way around a number of political circles. He first made himself known as Robert Dole's 1988 presidential campaign, in his campaign as the National Youth Director.
That's right.
By 1992, he had become the executive director of Floyd Brown's Presidential Victory Committee, which produced an ad and a toll-free number with recordings of Gennifer Flowers' alleged conversations with Bill Clinton. His biggest claim to fame has been that he had a hand in the production of the famous Willie Horton commercial that helped to sink the Dukakis for president campaign. Is that true? Did you make the Willie Horton ad?
Well, I think I was 21 maybe when that ad came out. So if the answer is no, but if I had something to do with it, I'd be the best ad man in the world.
But Floyd Brown
at
did.
21. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, a group of people that I knew made the ad. I was 20. I was a kid. I didn't even get them coffee. I mean, I literally had nothing to do with it. I mean, it was Tony Fabrizio and Floyd Brown. I mean, those guys.
That led. I mean, you worked for Floyd Brown,
Well,
and that
let
led
me just say. I mean, I worked. I knew Floyd, and I knew several of the people involved in the Dole campaign. It's kind of where I cut my teeth in 1987 and 1988, and having the opportunity to work for Senator and Elizabeth and then Secretary, now both senators, Bob and Elizabeth Dole, was a tremendous honor for a young guy, and I was his National Youth Director, so I got to organize all the college campuses across the country, and we had a tremendous youth effort, and that really led me to my next job, which was at the Leadership Institute. Morton Blackwell, if you know anything about conservative youth politics, the Leadership Institute, I had the honor and privilege of running their schools, their training programs back in '89 and '90.
But the Leadership Institute, isn't that where this young O'Keefe fella came from, who was involved in
yes, I've read the same
Senator
thing.
Landry
Yeah.
issue and also
Sure.
the Acorn
There's
thing.
tremendous. There's a tremendous group of people who have come from Leadership Institute training. There's handful, maybe dozens of elected members of Congress and the Senate that have gone through those programs.
What year did you start running Citizens United?
I went to Citizens United in 1993 first as the political director, and I think I was like I was the second employee maybe, and so I stayed there for a couple of years. We had grown tremendously as an organization. It was very successful. And doing the Clinton investigations, in the '92 cycle, I had learned a lot about. I really learned a lot about the Clintons, and that's where I got my edge in Arkansas, and how the Whitewater investigation even started.
Well, in the middle of the Hillary movie, there is the story of Billy Dale, who was the head of the travel office in the White House. Here's a clip from that.
The White House Travel Office affair became known as Travelgate. When Dale's legal bills to defend himself were estimated to run as much as $750,000, he considered a plea deal, a fine of $69,000, and a brief jail sentence.
Blanche and I had been married for 38 years at that time. I decided that I would have to sell my home. Could I ask her to give up everything that we had worked for?
The plea bargain seemed just that, a bargain in order to save himself and his family from the unending ordeal. But when Dale was informed he would not be able to proclaim his innocence, he realized he couldn't bargain with the truth.
In the meantime, during this year, I got a notice from the IRS that I was being audited.
For the next 30 months, Dale was investigated. His son and daughter were also subpoenaed.
I remember Vicki, our oldest daughter, telling her mother that if I was found guilty, and maybe we better start over.
You were sent to jail. Something you
I remember during my trial, Vicky, my oldest daughter, telling her mother that if I was found guilty and had to go to jail for something that I did not do, that she didn't know if she could live in this country any longer when the government would be responsible for doing something like that to her father.
Let me ask you just a simple question about the movie itself. When he broke down there and said, let's start over, did you have to ask his permission to use him saying that? Because that's a dramatic part in this movie.
It certainly is. I mean, Billy and his family were just tremendous in helping us make this film. Because, you know, people, it's the old adage, everybody reads the criminal complaint on the front page of the paper saying you're accused of something. Very few see that you were found not guilty because it's on page A15. So it's all the way on the inside of the paper. And so he felt that this was his first opportunity, not to speak for him, but he really had it was a cathartic moment for him. And he was able to really, because of what we were doing, showing how ruthless this administration was, the then Clinton administration, and what they did to him as an individual, as a man.
Where is he now?
He lives in Virginia, quietly, with he and his wife, Blanche, and they came to the movie premiere.
I think that's a picture we see on the screen right there of the movie premiere.
Yeah.
Where was the movie premiere?
The movie premiere of Hillary, I don't remember. We've had so many. I think it was definitely here in Washington. I believe it was at the Lowe's, Georgetown.
But go back to this, you know, we're covering you and the movie and the case, all of this.
Yeah.
You jump to January where you got a 5-4 decision out of the court, and you've got what some people would say the 5 Republicans or the 5 conservatives, or the Kennedy, Scalia, Thomas, Roberts,
until this
Alito.
case, nobody's ever put Kennedy in the conservative column.
I understand, but I wanted to ask you this because before, a couple years ago, when you started all this, Mrs. O'Connor was the justice, and she was another swing vote in that situation. Did you ever analyze what it was going to take to get a 5-4 decision?
We felt, my legal team doing the analysis felt, and I completely agreed, that we really had 3 votes, hard, in our opinion, from previous writings, previous cases.
Well, and what year were you figuring this?
Up leading into this case.
But
so
I mean, that'd be
who were we
2000.
targeting? Meaning, who were our swing votes? So we felt we had 3, Justice Scalia, Thomas, and Kennedy. Because Kennedy had written extensively on First Amendment issues and on previous cases, including the McConnell case, which I was a party to. And so we felt that we had those 3. Our 2 swing votes, in essence, we had not 1 but 2. We had Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, because you didn't know where they were going to be because they had never had to answer these questions before.
Were they on the court when you decided to go for it?
No. I mean,
not at all. I mean,
I
2005, 2006 is when they came on the court.
I think the Chief Justice was, but not Alito. I think one of the 2 was, but it doesn't really matter because we didn't know where either would be in this ruling.
How much did the whole lawsuit cost you?
Oh, goodness. We have spent well in excess of $1 million on the legal fees related to this.
Did you have to raise it for this particular purpose?
We didn't have, nobody gives to McCain-Feingold lawsuits. So I think.
You mean you didn't call somebody and say, we're going after this one,
no.
We need 50 grand from it?
No, we used our general treasury to pay for it. We literally raised, directly as it relates to this lawsuit, less than $10,000.
Has there been an uptick since you won?
No.
No? You mean you're not getting any more money in since you won?
No one has called and said, wow, what a great victory. Here's a donation. If anyone's listening and would like to help us, we would love to have it. We spent over $1 million, about 1.2, 1.25 on the production of the film, and about the same amount on legal fees. So it's about $2.5 million, and virtually brought nothing back in
By the way,
It's a hard thing. I have an old adage, and I tell people this all the time. You can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. And so we make movies to try to break even to make the next movie. This movie had a bigger meaning for us, and that was because we were going to be making future movies. When I decided to make this movie when it was you and I and everyone in America thought Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, right? I mean, in 2006, 2007, she was the heir apparent to the nomination. And then, of course, the wheels came off.
Can you buy this movie?
Oh,
today?
sure.
Can the public buy it?
People can go to citizensunited.org and view all of our films. So we have tremendous
free
library. Well, it's not for free. You can go to the website and see the films, obviously, but the films cost anywhere from $15 to $20 on the website.
And did you ever get any feedback at all directly from Hillary Clinton about this movie?
No. I'd love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with her, only for the sense of what she thinks about the Supreme Court ruling. It would be interesting just to see her take on being a part of history as though she is. She was the vehicle for the case.
You go back in your own personal history to being very anti-Clinton and working hard to do everything you could to derail him. Wouldn't you say that's a proper characterization?
Well, I wasn't anti-Clinton. What I was a guy who felt that it was important to have somebody hold their feet to the fire and get the truth out, because the Clintons, and everybody remembers this. I mean, it's in now. It's been many years since their White House times, but everybody remembers the document dumps. Everybody remembers the leaks. Everybody remembers the pushback and the 24-hour spin cycle. Howard Kurtz's book that came out about how the White House had a spin cycle, that they would attack anyone who raised their heads, which, by the way, was led by James Carville and George Stephanopoulos and Paul Begala. I mean, the best of the best led that effort. And so we went up against the heavyweights, and I respected those guys. I don't know if they respected us, but we certainly respected them.
Do you know Eric Boehlert?
I do not.
You know who he is? Have you ever heard of him?
No.
I think he works for Media Matters, at least he did at one point. He wrote a piece for Salon.com back in 2004 about you.
Sure.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. He says stuff like this. In fact, in 1992, Bush's father condemned Bossie and Brown's gutter practices, telling reporters, "We will do whatever we can to stop any filthy campaign tactics." During that same campaign, George W. Bush, on his father's behalf, even sent a letter to 85,000 Republican contributors encouraging them not to contribute to Brown and Bossie's efforts. Did they ever say these kind of things in public and come back around behind you and say, "Keep going, David, you're doing
Absolutely
good stuff
not.
for us"?
They used to say those things, but you got to remember, George Bush signed McCain-Feingold. He signed a bill that everyone in this town was saying was unconstitutional. And I believe, I have no way to prove this, but I believe that they signed it hoping that the Supreme Court, they wanted to get the political benefit of signing it, and that they felt that someday the Supreme Court would overturn it. And in essence, I think they made a tragic mistake.
The odd thing is that Eric Boehlert, who must be a liberal based on the way he's writing about you, I mean, I don't know what the term he'd use, but he thinks that the press has been really good to you and that you're a friend of the press. And let me read this. The press has also been hesitant to discuss or dissect Bossie's current role. For instance, during the controversy surrounding the release of Fahrenheit 9/11, many news outlets, including the New York Times, in a June 27 article, simply identified Bossie as the president of Citizens United. But the Times is well acquainted with Bossie's modus operandi. He has boasted about feeding information to its reporters, and especially Jeff Gerth, every step of the way in their ill-advised and since discredited Whitewater investigation. Is that true? Did you feed Jeff Gerth that information?
Well, first of all, it's not ill-advised or unfounded. I mean, what he loves to, I guess here, mix fact and fiction. Jeff Gerth is one of the greatest reporters, in my opinion.
In your film, though, he's in this.
Well, he is in Hillary. He's retired since that time, so he wasn't in this film as a current reporter. He was retired at the time. But Jeff Gerth in the 90s was the top, or one of the top, investigative journalists at the New York Times. And I worked with him. I worked with dozens of reporters who wanted facts about the case.
Was Jeff Gerth ideological, or is he today?
No.
Why would he been participating in a film, though, you were doing he knew it was an anti-Hillary?
Well, because I think he trusted me in the sense that it would be a fair film about Hillary Clinton. He wrote a book on Hillary Clinton as well. So he clearly has decided in his own mind, and I'll let him speak for himself. But Jeff Gerth, was one of the great guys to work with in the 90s. I got the privilege of working with most of, if not all, the top reporters in this town, who are today the top reporters. Back then, they were Cubs, just like me.
All right, your organization, Citizens United, you've been the president of it for how many years?
I think 9 going on 10.
I don't know these are current board members, but I have your board list as Kirby Wilbur.
Yes, sir.
Ron Robinson.
Yes, sir.
John Bliss.
Yes, sir.
Brian Barry. Mm-hmm. Is there another one?
Well, myself, and I wasn't.
Okay.
And Doug Ramsey.
And who's Doug Ramsey?
Just a businessman, lives out in Seattle, Washington.
Who's Kirby Wilbur, and how did you get him to your board?
Well, this board, I inherited the entire board.
And they're still there?
They're still there.
And he used to be a talk show host out in
Kirby, yeah, one of
Seattle.
the top conservative talk radio show hosts in the country. Guest hosts for people like Sean Hannity. Is really one of the cream talk show hosts in the country, and a brilliant conservative leader.
Ron Robinson runs Young Americans Foundation.
Young America's Foundation.
Young America's Foundation.
Yes, sir.
They own the Reagan Ranch.
They do. They bought the Reagan Ranch from the president and have turned that into an incredible historic site. And they've built a museum in Santa Barbara, right near the ranch, in honor of the president.
John Bliss is in Denver?
Yes, sir. He's a lawyer in Denver. He's a lawyer.
How does he get into all this?
You know, John is actually, to correct myself, John's the only one who I did not inherit. John has been on the board now the last couple of years. He's a tremendous friend of mine. He's a constitutional scholar. He was, when Hank Brown was, how I got to know him was back in 1992 now. I'm dating myself again, but I've known him 18, 20 years. And John was the chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee's Constitution Subcommittee. So he was the top constitutional lawyer on the Judiciary Committee in the United States Senate.
Georgetown law grad.
Yep, and a tremendous, tremendous guy.
Brian Barry who is it?
Brian, I've known the longest of them all. Brian, who I inherited on the board. But when I walked into the Reagan-Bush campaign headquarters in 1984, and I said, I'm here, I'm 17, and I'm going to turn 18 on November 1st, 3 days before the general election, so I get to vote. I'd like to volunteer. And they pointed me to an office, and Brian Barry was the youth director. And so Brian and I have known each other now, golly, way too long. So it's a great board of directors.
But what you do, as you know, I can hear people watching saying, that guy is what's wrong with American politics. The same thing they would say with somebody on the left that's doing the same kind of thing, whether it's the George Soros operations and all that. What would you say to somebody that is furious with what's going on in politics today?
But it's not my, first of all, I'm the wrong vehicle to be mad at. I think that...
Yeah, but you make movies that they'll say, as a matter of fact, before you end, I'll give you a chance to think about it. Let's show you another clip, because this gets into somebody that's in prison right now. Let's watch this.
All of the expenses that I paid for entertainment and costs of various fundraisers for Hillary were never legally reported. But what I discovered was, because Hillary was involved directly, personally, and indirectly through her agent, Kelly Craighead, in conceiving the event, in soliciting the money to pay for the event, and then coordinating the expenditures for the event, clearly the two of them were violating federal law.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of Stanley Media, Stan Lee.
I just want to welcome you all to the Hollywood salute to President William Jefferson Clinton.
It was the biggest event ever produced in Hollywood for a president. Muhammad Ali, John Travolta, Brad Pitt, Shirley MacLaine, the Steenburgen, the Gregory Peck, Cher, Diana Ross, Patti LaBelle, Toni Braxton, Melissa Etheridge, Sugar Ray, Michael Bolton, Paul Anka. We had over 100 stars. The entire leadership of the Democratic Party was there, and it was a magical evening.
But just 2 days later, the magic was gone.
The Monday after the event, I got a phone call from Ed Rendell telling me that the Washington Post was asking questions. The position that Hillary Clinton would take was that she hardly knew me and that I didn't give any money, and that if I was smart in order to maintain my deal, that I would go along with that.
The Washington Post bombshell questioned Hillary's decision to associate with Paul, given his criminal past. The Clinton camp implied they weren't aware of it.
So why does a guy like this, who's in the middle of all kinds of trouble with this stuff, talk to you all?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. You'd have to really ask him that. But we were trying to find interesting stories. During the research phase of this film, the pre-production phase of this film, we were trying to find the real interesting stories, like Billy Dale, like Kathleen Willie. Maybe people have heard about it tangentially or seen something in the newspaper on it over the years, but they didn't really get the full story. So we were able to take 6 or 10, 12 minutes and really tell it in detail using interviews with them. At the time, he was under house arrest. If I believe the correct term is, he was wearing an ankle bracelet and couldn't leave his home. So we had to go to him somewhere in North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. And so we got a chance to visit with him for a day, and he showed us all of his documents. Clearly, all the pictures and videotape came from him as well. So we had it was one of the more interesting interviews. In
the American political life, what recourse does someone like Hillary Clinton have, or Bill Clinton, when you do a film like this and they disagree with the tenor of it? Can they sue you?
Politicians disagree with the tenor or tone of a lot of public discourse.
You can basically say anything about them you want to, and you really.
No, I can't say anything that's not true. I mean, if they feel that I've, to use words you haven't, but if I slandered them, they would have recourse. They could come and sue me. No one has ever said anything in any of my films, any of our films.
How many have you done?
We are set to release our 13th film in a couple of weeks, and our 14th in about 45 days. So that'll be 14 films in the last 5 years.
Which of those films has been the most successful?
Oh golly!
I assume you could say this one because it overturned a.
It did,
McCain
but financially it has not. Most people make determinations of what's successful, what's not successful, in monetary terms. I think we've had several films that fit, the very successful model that we would like to have. And I think one of which is Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny, which I did with Newt Gingrich, Newt and Callista Gingrich.
And let me stop you there, because we don't have a lot of time. But, you were fired by Newt Gingrich, and now you see all over the place you're working with Newt Gingrich.
Sure.
And
well,
how does that work?
Well, it took a lot of years. And to be candid, I mean, look, Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House. He had, the number 3 person in line for the White House. He was a busy guy. He didn't just focus on Dave Bossy or just didn't focus on my investigations back in the 90s. And yes, he did fire me, and yes, he remembers that. But the reality is it took us many years to get back together. But we have been, incredible friends for many, many years now. Again.
What did you have to do to get back together? Did he come to you, or did you go to him?
We ran into each other at CPAC, which is coming up later this month, the Conservative Political Action Conference. It's one of the biggest conservative, if not, it's the largest conservative gathering in the country here in Washington annually, and it is a wonderful event. I go for a little bit here and there each conference, and I ran into Newt, and his book, Rediscovering God in America, had just come out, and it was a bestseller. And it's a walking tour of Washington, D.C. and our founding fathers and the history of that. So I said to him, hey, I'm making documentaries. I would love to turn that book into a film. And that has been a tremendously successful film for us.
Is that a moneymaker for somebody like him?
Well, not a lot. I mean, considering his, he probably makes more in a speech because he's, look, these very successful people like Newt Gingrich, have big books and speaking, and which is wonderful, and they deserve it.
Do you have to pay people who participate in documentaries?
No, we really don't. I mean, we once in a while we'll have a stipend here and there, but almost everybody you see in our films, 99% we do not.
One of the things you notice in your films is that it's all the same folks that you see on television now. Ann Coulter,
sure.
Babe Buchanan. We just saw Dick Morris and Tony Blankley and Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey and Larry Kudlow. And today Larry Kudlow's somebody's talking about him running for the Senate in New York. Same people just moving around in different venues. Does this turn out to be a lifetime profession?
Well, look, what it is I'm making a movie. When I'm making a movie, what I would like to do is have it be successful, and therefore I need to market it. Well, the more you have known entities in the films, the easier it is to market. And so, we have a film out, Perfect Valor, with Fred Thompson on the Iraq War. That came out several months ago now, and it won the best film at the GI Film Festival. We have award-winning films.
When you started this, you were single. You're now married. There's a picture of your wife, I believe. Is it Susan? Is that
Susan? Yes.
On the website, and there's a group of women there. Which one is she in that picture?
She is in the blonde, the one next to the gentleman. So that's my wife, Susan.
The reason I bring that up, because we only have a couple minutes, is that when you started all this, you were single. You now have 3 children.
Well, I was single and I lived in a firehouse. So I've been a Montgomery County volunteer fireman for 20 years now. And so I lived in the firehouse all through the 90s. I moved in 1990 and I moved out in 2000.
So what drives you in this? Is it money? Is it politics? Is it something you feel strongly about politically? What is it?
I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative first. I've been a conservative my whole life. I was born and raised in East Boston, in the city. It's not a conservative place. And as I said earlier, I was the first Republican in my family. Now there's many that have turned from independents and Democrats to Republican. But the point is that I'm a movement conservative. I've learned to believe that smaller government, less government intrusion, gives people the greatest opportunity.
Would you change any of your tactics that you used in the past? I mean, some people refer to you as a modern-day Donald Segretti, and that won't mean a lot to some people, but others it will.
No, look, politics is a tough business. I have been on the receiving end just as much as I've been on the giving end. So I'm okay. It's a full contact. I call it a full contact sport. And people who play this game and who understand it, I don't take it. It's the old Godfather. It's not personal. It's just business. I mean, in this town, you really have to take that to heart because it's you have to have a thick skin. People say, look, you Google, Citizens United and Dave Bossy. There's a lot of people who say a lot of nasty things. They don't know. They make it up. They connect dots that aren't connectable. It's fine because I have a thick skin. I know what I'm doing. I have a great partner in my wife who supports everything I do. Now I have 3 kids, 4, 6, and 8-year-olds. So I'm a full-time dad as well.
We're out of time. Quickly, where did you meet your wife?
I met her, Mark Kirk, when he was first running for Congress. He was a former staffer with me, and she was volunteering to help him, and I met her there.
And he's now running for the Senate
United
in Illinois.
States Senate in Illinois.
David Bossy, President of Citizens United. Thank you. We are out of time.
Thank you.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.